Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maria Coleman. She is the Director of Development at the Seward House. And take it away, Maria.
Thank you, Amy. So hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in and joining us today. I'm standing in our formal parlor, which is where all of our tours start at the Seward House Museum. Right now, we have just reopened to the public. We were closed in January and February, so we reopened last week. And I'll talk a little bit about our opening and what it looks like to take a tour here, and then we'll take you on a quick abbreviated tour throughout the house, and then happy to answer any questions afterwards. So right now, we are open Tuesdays through Saturdays from 10 until 5. We have guided tours that last about an hour. Those run every day at 10 a.m., 12 p.m., 2 p.m., and 4 p.m. Due to our COVID guidelines and the fact that some of our rooms, as you'll see when we walk through, are on the small side, we do ask for pre-registration for tours. We're limiting our tours to 6 people per group, and that allows for social distancing throughout the museum for parties on the tour as well as the tour guide. So you can see in the room I'm standing on, we have these little X's on the floor throughout the room so that all the parties can properly social distance. We also have hand sanitizing stations located throughout the museum so that folks have access to those throughout their tour. For pre-registration, we take tour registration over the phone if people call us at the museum. Folks can also register themselves for a tour on our website, sewardhouse.org. We have a form there where they can fill out everything, pay online for their tour or pay at the door. The other thing that we've been doing since COVID is a health form. So we ask anybody who registers online or at the museum to fill out a short health survey just saying that they agree to wear a mask for the duration of their tour. They're not showing symptoms, haven't been exposed that they know of. So just those general health questions. But so far, when we reopened to the public last summer, as well as our reopening right now, we've seen great cooperation from everybody who's been on tour, really following all of our guidelines that we've put into place and adhering to those social distancing guidelines. So that's been really great to see. Also right now, we have not yet brought back our volunteers. We're just slowly beginning that process to bring them back. We have about 40 volunteers split between those who give tours and those who work the front desk. So we're eagerly anticipating when we can bring our volunteers back. But in the meantime, visitors who come to the museum are getting a staff-led tour. Another thing that's been great since we've had smaller groups of people on each tour, because bear in mind, during our normal busy months, we could have 20 to 25 people on a tour in the summertime. So that's down quite significantly to only 6. But also we've been able to really tailor the tours to those individuals' interests and really have a back and forth dialogue and conversation, really learning about them, their interest in the family and the history, and tailoring our tour to that. So it's been great to get to know our public a bit better through all of this. This year, after reopening, we are mostly on a digital schedule of events. We have a lot of digital programming coming up, so check out our Facebook page, Instagram page, our website for details about all of that. But just like I'm sure a lot of businesses in the area, we're eagerly anticipating late summer, fall, when we can perhaps return to some form of in-person programming. So just like everybody else, we're staying tuned to what's going on with the virus and looking forward to this return to normalcy. So that's kind of our housekeeping about what we're up to right now in terms of reopening and our tour structure. When folks come to the museum, the only way to see the house is through a guided tour. That's because everything in the home, 99% of the objects, the fixtures, are original and authentic to the Seward family. So that's very unique. That also means that we only do these guided tours. We focus on the history of William Seward, his wife Frances, their descendants, but also where they fit into the larger picture of 19th century history, Seward's connection to President Lincoln, and his political career. So we really cover quite a lot within this hour-long tour frame. But I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough, and we're going to focus on some of the stories that we're really highlighting this month in March. But first, when people come in for a tour, they enter this room, the formal parlor, where they're introduced to the Seward family. This would be the room where the Sewards would welcome their guests and entertain them. And from here, we move into the more private library. So in this room, you can see the family's collection of books. We have a portrait of William Seward above the fireplace, statues of Seward and Lincoln. So this room is where we set the tale for Seward's political ambitions, his political career, and his work with President Lincoln as his Secretary of State during the Civil War. From there, we go across the main hall into our drawing room. So this, just like the library, would have been a family space to gather, to entertain. So we really focus on the Seward children in this room, introducing them all through their portraits, talk about this as the family gathering space, and also continue with Seward's story during his time as Secretary of State, watching as he lost his best friend, President Lincoln, when he was assassinated in 1865. And we also tell the story of the almost assassination of William Seward himself that same evening. And from here, we move into the dining room. And I'm going to turn it over to Mitch, our facilities manager.
Thanks, Maria. Hi, everyone. It's nice to virtually see all of you, although I can't wait until all of you visit the Seward House Museum. As Maria said, we are open despite the guidelines in place. So this room, the dining room, is one of the rooms that many guests remember from their visit to the Seward House Museum. It's one of the more grander rooms of the house. William Seward was quite famous for his entertaining over the course of his political career, his dining room diplomacy. So here in the dining room, you can of course see the dining room table, currently set for 12 people. Over the course of William Seward's political career, he would entertain hundreds of guests and feed them glorious amounts of food, copious amounts of drink, and he would masterfully guide the conversations during dinner around his political agenda. And it's during these dinner parties that William Seward would hold that he would really leverage his interest in furthering the American Republic into the future. And one of Seward's trademark accomplishments during his political career was his negotiation for the acquisition of the territory of Alaska, which was accomplished in March of 1867. So Maria mentions that we're having a number of initiatives for the month of March. One of those is focusing on the anniversary of the acquisition of the territory of Alaska. And behind the dining room table, we can see a large portrait depicting the final moments of those negotiations, which took place in Washington, D.C. This portrait was painted in 1867 by famous German-born painter Emanuel Leutze. And for anybody who's familiar with Leutze, you might know his most famous work, Washington Crossing the Delaware, which is that picture of George Washington standing in the boat crossing the Delaware River. Emanuel Leutze was a family friend of the Sewards, so if you visit the Seward House Museum, you can see not only this Leutze portrait, but several others that he painted for the Seward family as well. So we have a number of Leutzes here in our collection, but this is often the most discussed Leutze since it depicts one of Seward's crowning achievements. Now, the purchase of Alaska takes place 2 years after the American Civil War. So William Seward is serving as Secretary of State for President Andrew Johnson at this time. So here, seated with the maps on his lap, we have Secretary of State William Seward, and he's talking with Edward de Stokel. And Edward de Stokel was the Russian diplomat to the United States. And during the American Civil War, William Seward had cultivated a very friendly relationship with Russia in an effort to prevent Great Britain and France from siding with the Confederacy during the American Civil War. but that's a story for another day. Today, we're going to focus exclusively on the purchase of Alaska. And throughout the spring of 1867, Edward de Stokel has approached William Seward several times and is trying to get the U.S. to acquire the territory of Alaska. And people often wonder, well, why was the United States interested in the territory of Alaska? Gold and oil weren't discovered until later in the 19th and early 20th century. So during these negotiations, the value of the territory wasn't very high. But William Seward was a man with vision. You might be familiar with the phrase manifest destiny, which is the belief that the United States was destined to expand to the western reaches of North America and even beyond that. William Seward, during his years as Secretary of State, set the groundwork for American empire later in the century. Although he was unsuccessful in securing territory in the Danish West Indies, the Caribbean, and even Greenland, Alaska was a favorite territory of his because of the whaling industry, which was quite prominent at this time, but also because of its geographic location close to Russia, which was our strongest ally at the time. So there were a number of reasons, strategic reasons, that Seward wanted to acquire the territory, but the two men needed to agree on a price for Alaska. Russia wanted upwards of $20 million for it, but Seward swore that Congress would never approve an amount of more than $5 million. So there was a bit of a disagreement, you could say. And throughout the spring of 1867, the two were going back and forth on how much the territory is actually worth. And on March 29th, 1867, Edward de Stokel approaches William Seward at Seward's apartment in Washington, D.C., and tells him that the following morning, on the 30th of March, the two could finalize the deal. But Seward had a famous expression that rest is rust, and refused to wait until the following morning to agree to terms set by Russia. Seward was going to agree to a contract set by his terms as soon as he could. So Seward demanded that Edward de Stokel show up to the State Department at midnight that night to finalize the deal. De Stokel reluctantly shows up to the State Department in just a few hours' time and is shocked to find the entire State Department fully staffed, all the lights on, and Seward at his desk with the paperwork ready to sign on the dotted line. And for the next 4 hours, the two would go back and forth on a price. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, on March 30th, 1867, the U.S. agrees to buy the territory of Alaska for $7.2 million US, roughly 2 cents an acre for land more than twice the size of Texas. If we were to strike the same deal today, we would only have to pay about $122 million for the entire territory. And this included all of the infrastructure that Russia had developed since their entering the territory in the 1740s. So Americans saw this as a huge success. It was an opportunity for a recently unified United States to grow together into new territory. So the feeling of this purchase was pretty positive. But after Seward's death, Americans start to turn on the former Secretary of State and aren't making much money in the territory. So it's after Seward's passing that newspapers across the country start nicknaming the territory Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. And many people who visit the Seward House Museum today know the purchase of Alaska as Seward's Folly for this reason. But as I mentioned, later in the century, several valuable resources are discovered and Alaska is redeemed. However, there is a bit of an issue as to the transfer of ownership of this territory. Certainly, Russia arrived in Alaska in the 1740s, but for thousands of years before then, Native Alaskans had occupied the territory. And here we have an ownership transfer thousands of miles away from their home, and the ownership of Alaska changes hands without any involvement at all of the Native Alaskans. And so you might be wondering, well, how did this purchase affect those who were already living in Alaska? And if you're interested in finding out more about this topic, our Education and Outreach Coordinator, Zach Finn, will be hosting a talk on this very issue later in the month on March 26th at 3 p.m. And he'll be discussing some of these implications and meeting with people from the Aleutian Islands specifically to talk more about this issue. So there's a lot more conversations being had about this. But I certainly encourage all of you to visit the Seward House Museum to look at this painting in person and to also learn some of the more intricate stories involved with the purchase of Alaska, and even to see some of the items that William Seward received when he visits Alaska shortly after his retirement, a few years after the purchase. Now, as facilities manager of the Seward House Museum, I help with the maintenance and preservation of the site. But the actual care of the collections, that responsibility lies in the hands of our Director of Collections and Exhibitions, Emily Kraft, who I'm going to turn it over to now.
Hello, everybody. How are you all doing? Hopefully well. My name is Emily Kraft. I'm the Director of Collections and Exhibitions here at the Seward House Museum. I actually stepped into this role about a year ago, so right before the pandemic, but I was previously our administrative coordinator and an intern before that. So I've been involved with the museum about 3 years now, and I'm just so happy to be here. The collection is amazing. And as Mitch noted, it is my job to take care of the collection. So I have essentially two roles. I have to take care of the collection and maintain it, but then I also have to create exhibits. So on the collection side, I'm involved with this idea of passive conservation. So we want to make sure that these objects last lifetimes into the future. And so we do consult outside conservators on many projects. Currently, we are taking Seward's Chinese tapestry out to Albany to have that conserved over the next 6 months. So we're actively conserving objects, but my job is to make sure that light levels are correct, temperature and humidity is correct, that the objects are just cared for, dusted, watched over. So that's my part of the job for collections. And then for exhibits, I am involved from conception to completion. So I am honored to be a part of our new women's exhibit. So that is another theme that we are talking about this month, Women's History Month. And I've really found newfound passion in women's history through being involved in this exhibit behind me. But the next two rooms used to actually be bedrooms for the Seward family. But in the past years, way before my time, they've been converted into these interactive exhibits. So when you come to the museum, you not only have a chance to take a tour around and have this intimate experience with a guide, but you also get to take time to yourself to interact with our exhibits. So I love that we're able to have this balance and really able to have everyone's preferred interaction with history all here in one place. So the idea for this exhibit really started at the end of 2019. We knew we wanted to acknowledge the centennial of the passage of the 19th Amendment, of course, was last year. So we knew we wanted this exhibit to be based around women's rights. We knew we wanted a 2-year exhibit, and we knew we wanted to involve Frances Seward, wife of William Henry Seward, and her sister Lizette. So they were both peripherally involved in the movement. So as you'll learn through the exhibit, neither one of them wanted to take a clear stance on suffrage right away. And so in the first room, we really explore and break down why the sisters maybe didn't want to get involved, why they felt they should or should not get involved. And so we wanted to really draw out this Seward story in the first room. And then in the second room, which is a little bit larger, we open it up to the national story. So how does Frances and Lizette fit within the Central New York movement and then the national movement? So you can really see the progression as you walk through the exhibit. But before I stepped into this position, our education team really took this on. So I want to give them credit for starting this exhibit, but I had the honor of painting it here and really working with our facilities manager to make it what we had envisioned. So creating an exhibit is very involved. You have to do initial research, then you have to really scale down that research to fit on a text panel because it can't be a book on a wall. So then you have to pick and choose what information you want to include, what's important. what could maybe get left out. And so that takes a lot of editing and rewriting. So that's a lot of hard work. And then you also have to find out, do you want to have collections objects on loan? And do you want to include the collection from the museum? So then you figure out how collections items can work into the narrative and really support the narrative. And then, of course, you have to prepare this space. Many of you might have visited the museum and you've seen it as an Alaska exhibit, or you've seen it as a Civil War exhibit. So you have to obviously transform the space to fit the theme of the exhibit. And then you have to create the text panels. That takes design. And then, of course, you have to finally put everything in place. So unfortunately, this exhibit didn't get its due diligence. We opened early March last year, and we were only open for a few weeks before the pandemic. And then we reopened again in August. So we've only seen about 2,400 visitors, and most of them have been digital. So we really are excited to be back for 2021 and give this exhibit the true dedication that it needs. So please come by and see it. It's been a lot of work, but it is finally finished and ready for visitors to come and learn about the Seward story. So I'm going to have Maria take over, so I can just briefly take you around the exhibit. But in this first room, we have some large text panels like this. We have 4 of them. And so these give you the core story about Frances and Lizette. We define suffrage for you. So we give a lot of context so you understand these words and themes. So anybody of all ages can come into the exhibit and really understand what we're talking about. We want to make sure it's appropriate for all ages. And this particular panel, we talk about the power of the page. So Frances and Lizette were avid readers. They both had very advanced educations for their time. So reading was really important. We see in a letter that Frances is reading a book about women's rights and abolition. Should they get involved? Is it right for them to get involved, or should they stay silent? So we see direct primary resources that books were influencing their thinking. And these letters are particularly special because they are on loan from the University of Rochester Rare Books and Special Collections. So the last generation, Will III, gave almost all of our paper materials and letters over to the University of Rochester. And the Seward Project has been working diligently to transcribe and digitize these letters. So they are not here at the museum, so it is special time to come and see them because they will go back to Rochester at the end of this year. But if you are interested in seeing other letters, please visit sewardproject.org to learn more about the Seward family. So then as we walk around here, of course, we have the title. The title is The Vote, Changing Minds, Changing Times. And you'll come to learn that Frances and Lizette's minds changed as the times changed. We have some wonderful quotes here on the wall that really highlight some of these important quotes. So in this quote, Frances is talking about Mrs. Wright. Of course, Martha Coffin Wright. She was a friend of both Frances and her sister. Miss Wright was here often to meet with Frances and Lizette and convince them to get involved. We have some definitions here, the Married Women's Property Rights Act of 1848. So again, we give this overarching context of what's going on at this time as Frances and Lizette are entering the 1850s, thinking about abolition and women's rights. So there was a lot happening. Then around over here, we have 2 more text panels. So here we pay tribute to those at the center of the rebellion. So that's Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Martha Coffin Wright, and Lucretia Mott. Again, all friends of Frances and Lizette, really pushing Frances and Lizette to show their support. We have some of the Seward House's collection objects. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton actually died here in 1868. So we have a piece of china to really symbolize Elizabeth Cady Stanton's visit here. And that dinner was also with the Chinese embassy, and women's rights topic came up during that dinner. So that was really kind of a hot topic at that time. And then, of course, we have a copy of 80 Years and More, so Elizabeth Cady Stanton's book. So you can come here and see the book. We've chosen a quote from the book. So again, you can engage with the book here and then a quote. You can also see Stanton was making notes and marks. So it's very real to see the engagement with this text. So if you'll follow me here to our second room. Again, this is where we open it up to the national stage. So Frances unexpectedly passes away in June of 1865 after her husband's almost full assassination. So it was very sad to lose Frances so suddenly. And then her sister passes 10 years later. So they're really involved at the really beginning of the movement. They do not see it any further. So we leave them in that room, and then we introduce what was going on. So we do this through a timeline style. So you can come up to the text panel, see the timeline. We have images, we have dates, and we have little excerpts of information. So if you're interested, you can look at this and then go on to learn more. And we also highlight in the timeline pro and anti-suffrage. So we want to tell both sides of the story. And then for collections objects in this room, we actually have some on loan from the Cayuga Museum and the Howland Stone Store Museum. So they have an amazing poster collection. So right behind me here, we have a suffrage meeting poster. So we were very honored to be able to have these on loan from the Howland Stone Store. So that's another reason to come out and see these objects. We have a full case of objects in here with some labels. We have a dress that Frances wore for a picture, and then the picture was made into a statue. So we really highlight Frances here from our collection. Here we have the Golden Lady. So this is a very common image from 1905. Again, our third poster on loan from the Howland Stone Store. And then to conclude, we have our final timeline, which leaves the movement on November 2nd, 1920, when 8 million women cast their ballot. But of course, as we know, it doesn't end there. And there's a lot more that develops from 1920 to 2020. So we really talk about the centennial that follows, and of course, how we're still fighting for equal pay and equal rights with men. So it really isn't over. And so we want people to walk away knowing that there's still work to be done. Of course, we give you these splashes of suffrage words. So we've got suffrage, perseverance, bias, glass ceiling. So there's a lot of different ways to engage here. And then to conclude, before you leave the exhibit, we ask that you participate in our voting booth. So it was really important to us that we had a physical participatory element. And so we have this really cool nook where you can walk in, you can pick up a slip of paper, and you can vote on one or all three of the questions, and we change those questions monthly. So it really gets visitors thinking, and they leave with so much information and so much to think about. So please come by and see it. It really is a wonderful exhibit and has been months of work. So thank you so much.
And we're happy to take any questions.